We're going to have some fun today, I hope. I'll tell you a little bit about how I got introduced to, and those of you who don't even want to try to say neuro-linguistic programming, just call it NLP and you'll sound really smart. I was in a graduate program in guidance and counseling out in South Dakota, and I had my undergraduate degree was in psychology, and then I was in this graduate program, and I was just like tired of psychology. I was tired of all of these people who had all of these ideas about how messed up we are. And at some point in my grad program, this little flyer came across my desk. And it was on this weird thing called neuro-linguistic programming. And I thought, wow, what's that? And so I attended a first introductory workshop. And what I saw there was so intriguing to me that I thought, wow, I really have to know more about this. And so I ended up dropping out of I became a college dropout and studied NLP for the next 15 years, almost exclusively. And what you're going to get today is a bare bones explanation, and hopefully lots and lots of ways that you can use it in your everyday life and use it at work. And the background of it, I'll give you some history. Neurolinguistic programming was a group of California hippies, we'll say, who were into computers. And they thought, what would it be if we approached human behavior like a programmer would approach a program? What would happen if we looked at human behavior? And if you think about it, most of the psychologies are developed from studying people who are dysfunctional. We watch and to see how bad are they, basically. And these California hippies, they thought, a couple of them were Richard Bandler and John Grinder. How many of you are familiar with NLP at all? A little bit? Anyway, these guys thought, let's take a different approach to this. Let's look at how people do what they do really well. Let's look at the people who are doing what they do at the top of their fields and see what is it that they do that makes them effective, that makes it work for them, that makes them float to the top of their field, whatever it is. What are they doing? And so they did a lot of things. They wanted it to be based on observation, so they took a lot of videotape of people. And they would slow the videotapes way down, or they would turn the sound off and just watch, or turn the picture off and just listen. But they began, almost frame by frame, began to look at what is it that people do when they are doing what they do well, or when they're communicating well. And what they just began to discover all kinds of interesting things. For instance, when people are in rapport, and we're going to go through a lot of these things, they tend to enter a dance. They begin to look alike. So if two people are coming into rapport, they will begin unconsciously to mirror one another. And this movement, and it's fascinating, what I'm hoping you'll do when you leave here is become acute observers of what's going on with different people, and it's best when you're eavesdropping and not directly involved. So like the developers of NLP did, they just eavesdropped, like majorly. And so they noticed that the vocal qualities would come into range with each other, the gesturing and the movement would come into range with each other, that there would be almost a monkey see, monkey do kind of movement when people were in matched rapport. And they thought, wow, what's happening there? And then they took it further. And the stuff I want to go through today is to take it further and what they discovered as they observed it in this way. So one of the things, and I'll just start, one of the things here comes our cook. One of the things they discovered is that if you think about your brain and the way that you get information into your brain, you have really only 5 different ways to get information in, and those are your sensory channels. If you think about your brain and how you input information into your brain, you really only have the 5 sensory channels for getting that brain stuffed. So you bring things in visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, and then taste and smell. And then from that, we build what you might think of as our map of the world. So in my brain is mapped all of my experience, who I am, people I've met, everything is mapped there. Now, one of the assumptions we make when we're communicating with others is that their map is like my map. So I walk into a communication and I think, I have this map of the world, they have a map of the world, it's the same map. That's our first mistake. And then what they noticed was, the developers of NLP, what they noticed was that many of us have a tendency to take one of our sensory systems and make it a favorite. That some of you like to think in pictures, that some of you like to think in words, and that some of us like to think according to how things feel. Most of us have a tendency to take one of our representational systems and make it a favorite. So what I want to do is start by going through the basic representational systems and begin to give you a set of tools that will help you identify, both in yourself and in other people, which system is in play at any moment in time. When I studied this, I felt like I had been going around the world with blinders on. It opened so many informational channels to me and gave me so many options on how I could communicate or attempt to communicate with different people that I literally was just like, wow, how could we have missed this? And so I'm hoping you'll have a bit of that feeling yourself today. I also don't want to just talk at you all day, so what we're going to do is we're going to give a little bits of information and then have you practice experiment with each other. Begin to observe right away what you're doing, what other people are doing. You'll drive yourself crazy trying to figure out what you're doing, but that's part of my intention here. So let's take a walk through the 3 sensory systems, and I have a single handout I'll give you later about this so that you can take it home with you. One of the most fascinating things that the developers of NLP noticed is that when you're using a certain part of the brain, there is an eye movement that will indicate which part of the brain you are using. We don't know everything about the neurological hooking up of that. We just know what we see. And when we observe it, we can see, and we'll go through each one. So the first one is visual. And when someone is, and I'll give you some generalizations about these, and we start out by generalizing, but then what gets really exciting is when you are able on your feet to watch people move from one system to another and wonder what they're doing and how they're doing it. So the visual, let me look around. The visual person has a tendency to look visual. I'm thinking about, boy, I had a feeling when I came here today that I would not find a lot of visuals. Quinn, what's your name? Sonia. So there are people whose primary way of moving through the world is to process pictures, take in and process pictures. And when they're doing that, they have an eye movement that's very quick and goes up. If I were to throw out things like, how many of you can see the animals on the front of the building? Okay. Another visual movement is to just look straight on. It's almost like a glazed look. How many of you can see what's on the front seat of your car? Yeah. So you see, you don't know you're doing it, but you're moving around to turn on or access certain parts of your brain. Generally, when it's a visual recall, you're going up. And we'll play with this a little bit. So the visual people, in terms of a communication style, tend to think in pictures. Pictures happen very quickly. They're organized in a way that can sometimes to some of us seem uncanny. They're like, a lot of times when people have good vision for the future, they have an ability to take the images, rearrange them, and project out. There's kind of an impatience with other people who are not visual. They will be the ones who will finish somebody's sentence for them because that person's not thinking fast enough for them. And so that's very quick, tend to look visual. The body type overall, there's an upright movement and a vocal quality that comes from the high up in the chest and out. And we'll go through each one of these. These are generalizations, but when you come into view of somebody, you can begin to say, okay, who is Michelle? You know, I'll tell you who she is in a way. Yeah. And so the communication style, very quick on their feet, good organizers, get it down, get impatient with people who are not coming on as fast, upper quality, upper voice, good spellers. In the school systems, we find that people with strong visual strategies are the ones who can see the words and spell them. And if you ever go to or watch a spelling bee on television, whole line of children, or watch them spell, they'll go straight up to get the word. And they have it stored visually in their brain. I'm just going to deal with the three primary modalities today, because that will give us a good working ground. But there are subtleties in these, but we'll give you the main ones. So the second system is auditory. And I was intrigued by coming here today because of your engineering department. Okay, so the auditory tends to think in words in the mind. Okay, so the process, if you could be inside of a person who's processing auditorily, you would hear self-talk. You would hear them solving a problem by going, on the one hand, if we do it this way, this will be the result, but on the other hand, this would be the result. But maybe if we introduce A, B, C, this would be the result. So it's internal, and it's moving, and it's talk. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about the... Jim's going, yep. I will tell you, when the people who process auditorily as a primary system very often land in engineering, math, science, computers. So there's something, because the auditory processing tends to be very thorough, they will catch the things the visual passed by. Okay? So I want to really seat this in the people that you're working with as you work together to give you some ideas on how we can not only recognize each other's different systems but respect them, which is really critical. Because if you're a really strong visual, you're going to think that auditory came from the moon. The movement is down left, and I want you to learn these on another person's body, not on yourself, because if you try to do it, you'll go crazy. It'll be all over. So the auditory processing, very often you'll see an ear cocked or a head cocked like this. When I look out, a lot of times you'll see somebody who's sitting in what we call a pipe smoking position, or the saxophone position, hunched over. And when you ask them a question, they will make a downward movement, sometimes slower than the visual, as they think about what you said. Now, think about this in terms of our day-to-day communication. You're a person who likes the visual contact. You've been taught to keep eye contact. But if you are a thinker, an auditory thinker, you get nervous when people stare at you. It interrupts your thought. It confuses you. And if you're problem solving and you're an auditory, you want to have the space in your mind to solve the problem, to work it through. Okay? The movement down left, sometimes slower. They're the ones that the visuals want to finish the sentences for. Now, another thing that the developers of NLP noticed is if you tune your ear, you can very often hear which system a person is using. Because the visuals, this is the linguistic part of neuro-linguistic programming, how it's all put together. The visuals will use words. See, I see you. Oh, I can see that. Or, that looks good to me. Or, I can picture that. They will give you a verbal representation of what the brain is doing. And they will also maybe ask others in other systems to match that. They'll say, can't you see that? Can't you see that? You can sometimes find out what's going on in the communication process by tuning into the words and saying, okay, what am I saying and what are they saying? The auditories, what kinds of words do you imagine they would use? I hear you. Sounds good to me. If I say, I'm tuning into what you're saying, how many of you get a picture for tuning in? What is it? Okay. How many of you like the word tuning in? Just felt good. Okay, so we have the representational system, we have the language that goes with the representational system, and we have the eye movement that goes with it. So right away you have a handful of different things you can look for. It's not so important when you're just in love with somebody and you're both having a great time, but when communication stalls and you go, what's going on here and why are we not communicating? It gives you a whole set of questions to ask. What's going on? How are they processing? How am I processing? So we'll do the third system and then we'll let you work with each other a little bit and see what happens. The third system, the third way of processing information is to do it kinesthetically or tactily. So the kinesthetic is organizing their lives on how things feel, literally. And what you'll see with kinesthetics is, and it's a tactile, it's movement-oriented. They're the kind who don't like to sit in a chair very long. They get antsy. They want to move. They learn better by doing. They're hands-on. A lot of times in the body, you'll see a lot of this. The processing is it's like gathering a whole bunch of information and then asking, how do I feel about that? There's a lot of kinesthetics in here and a lot of auditories, which if I were doing a group at a sales force, for instance, I'd probably see a lot of visuals. But your group is unique in the kind of things that you're doing. Kinesthetic recognition, a lot of times you'll see they might dress more for comfort than how it looks. They may choose a lot of motion in the body. A lot of times the vocal tones are coming from further down in the diaphragm. And so there's like a deepness to the voice that's not there in a visual. So you can hear sometimes vocally the difference. So if you would imagine this, and there's kind of a more casual, laid out feeling, just for sake of experimentation, sit up very straight in your chairs. Okay. For some of you that will feel very strange. For some of you, you were already there. So say, good morning, America. Good morning, America. Okay, say it again. Good morning, America. Good morning, America. Okay. Do you hear the upper chest inflection? Okay, now get comfortable. Now say, good morning, America. Good morning, America. Can you hear the difference? It dropped way into the diaphragm. So the vocal quality is something to listen to too when you're thinking about how is a person putting their world together. Now, so these are the starting places. What kind of language would they use? Feels good to me. I'm in touch with that. Move. It moves me. Okay, so these are the three primary systems. Representational systems. These three systems are how you put your world together. You also have taste and smell in there. We know taste and olfactory and taste and smell. Memories, for instance, can be extremely powerful. The smell of fall, the bus going by, these are all stored in there too. And so when we get to this place, what's interesting is not so much what is my strongest system, but what is my weakest system. For instance, for myself, I'm not a real strong math person. I have a fairly weak auditory system. And one of the ways, for instance, I can tell is if you give me verbal directions to get to your house, by the time you get to the third one, I've lost the first one. How many of you can, and show me a map or write it down? So what was interesting to me when I first got introduced to this was about the only thing I was doing on my auditory system was bad-mouthing myself. I had an internal talk going that was like, you dumb shit, that kind of stuff. Or that was a stupid thing to do. I can't believe that you did that. And so not only did I not have a strong auditory system, but I was trashing my auditory system. So it was not working for me. I would stay away from it if I could. So we're going to play with some of that too. What the developers of NLP realized was that people who go to the top of their game have strength in all three systems and can move to the system that's right for the right task, for the task at hand. I think it's interesting that we have a way of putting our world together and that we have a primary system. And once you play with this for a while and practice it, you'll begin to recognize those different systems. But it's not the only interesting thing. The interesting thing is how you put them together. and how they show up. And we're going to spend the majority of the time today looking at how do you put it together. And if you recognize that you're in one system and somebody's in another system, how do I vary my behavior to close the gap? And it's real fascinating to try to do that. For starters, though, what I would like to do, let me ask you if you have any questions first, because we're going to play with this a little bit. Dean.
Explain how this thing got the term neuro-linguistic programming.
Well, they were, yeah, I know. What were they thinking? They were probably, who knows? I'm not going to say.
I guess I understand the program.
Okay, the neural.
They were looking at.
Okay, so think of brain processing, neuro, of the brain, linguistic, of the language, and they took a lot of things from Noam Chomsky, and they were out there really looking at how other people were putting things together. So the linguistic part, which is really a pretty major part of NLP, so neuro, how the language reflects the neuro and how it's all put together.
So the neural part of that has to do with the seeds?
Yeah, like what we're really looking at is a reflection of how the brain is processing information. And we don't really know, I don't think anybody's done PET scans or anything that says, oh, and when they're looking up, this part of the brain lights up. I haven't seen any evidence like that yet, but I've seen evidence on the faces of all the people I work with that when they go up, that's what they're doing, is seeing pictures. Yeah, I wish, when I tried to sell a training to people called neuro-linguistic programming, it was like my early career, I don't know how to say that, or couldn't even say it all the way. So I agree with you, it's a crazy name. Other questions or thoughts? Physically looking up. And I'd like to have all of you adjust your own sensory monitors right now. I don't know if you saw Dean when he was asking me the question, but where did he go? Did anybody notice? He went straight up left to find his question. Why did they call it what? So he went straight, he went straight up left. You just did it too. Okay. You're picture seeking. You're looking for something. Understanding, you're looking for how did they put those words together? Okay, so let me ask you a question. Think of something that you say to yourself when you really feel good about a job done. How many of you hear words in your head? Okay, the secret's out. No. We all self-talk. So if I were self-talking, but in particular, if I was on a tricky issue, and I was going to, like a math issue, an engineering issue, and I was going to try to sort it out, you might literally see me withdraw and go like this, and follow the whole movement down. Like my first husband was an electrical engineer, and he built substations and power lines. Very smart guy. But I would say, you want to go to a movie Friday night? And he'd go, what's a wife going to think? You know? And I didn't realize this when we both studied this together. It was like, wow, I get it now. So if you see a husband going, what he's really doing is, let me see, the movies. Is there a movie I'd like to see? Or maybe Friday night should be used. He's involved. And when I learned that as a visual and kinesthetic person, I don't have to demand that answer from him. I can say, think about it and let me know. Think it over and let me know how that sounds. Yeah, the movements you'll be able to watch them. Bob?
There was an interesting gesture in that oftentimes traditional body language suggests that this is blocking person.
Yeah.
It's a negative versus what you're reflecting at.
I think we should talk about that because there's a lot of people who have done body language things, created classes in body language. But in reality, if I were to make that assumption that this meant you were blocked to me and not open, what I've done is I've just denied you your map of the world. I have no curiosity about your map of the world. If I were curious about how you're mapping your world, I would say, are you cold? There's a Japanese art where if you sit like this, you're actually healing yourself. I guess my biggest lesson in learning NLP was never assume. Never assume that I understand what that meant. Be curious, be knowledgeable, be sensory aware, and then find out. Now, the fun challenge for you, and I'm presenting this stuff with you, but I'm going to leave you with the challenge of verifying it for yourself through your own observation. I'm not going to verify it for you. And when I first learned this, at first I was like, what? I was the same way. Why down? And then so I started watching television programs. And I would turn the picture off and listen. Or turn the picture on and the sound off and watch. I would watch talk shows. I would watch, because I wanted to see, is this for real? And you'll be interested to experiment with each other. But you'll be really paranoid for a while, like everybody's looking at you. The funniest thing I ever did was I did the training for the South Dakota Bar Association, and these are lawyers, like 200 lawyers, and afterwards, during the breaks and stuff, they'd come up to ask me a question, and they'd be like, what do you think about... It was funny. Okay, so let's experiment a little bit. It is, in a training situation, very awkward. Everybody's just, I don't want to move my eyes because they're going to think I'm doing something. But if we don't practice with it, we won't get it, right? In fact, I had a guy during a presentation one time, he said, no, this is bogus, we don't move our eyes. And I said, come up here, and I brought him up, and I said, now, tell me where you live in a house. Watch this. You'll get the weirdest feeling when I do this. What color is the house? White. How many people live in the house? 4. Do you have any pets? No. And he was just adamant he was not going to move his eyes. And what happened was the whole group went into trance, because you can feel it. My name is Patricia Jamie Lee, and I live in Cass Lake, Minnesota, and I'm married to Milt Lee, and it becomes this, it makes me crazy just to do it. I have to, okay. So finally I said, how did you decide what pants to put on this morning? And he's, okay, you got me, he says. You can't not move your eyes without making yourself crazy. I do want to mention one other thing I mentioned, though. Okay, sometimes, and he was trying to do this, and you can do this, but sometimes the visual access to the brain is a straight on, and you'll see it. It's as if something came between you and them. So I might be looking at Lynn, but she asks me something, and all of a sudden I'm seeing my grandbabies. And she will feel the disconnect. She may not understand it, but she'll feel that I just disconnected from her. But it's because I put a bunch of images between us. So you can watch for that too. And the fun part is you can actually begin to ask people, well, what did you just see? Or what did you just say to yourself? Or how did that feel to you? And they will feel relieved. Oh, this person gets me. Let's play with this a little bit. I think you should probably pick the person that you have the hardest time with, but I won't put that out there. Not that this group would have. Who's the hardest one to communicate with? What I'd like you to do is to go into pair 3s, I think. So 2 people are talking and one's observing, and you rotate it. And I want you to ask them just very personable, general questions about themselves. And your goal is to observe eye movements. Or, if you're really multi-talented today, listen and watch at the same time for linguistic cues. Okay, so you might ask questions like, what's your favorite hobby? Where did you go to school? Tell me about the kitchen in the house that you grew up in. Just general questions like that, okay? Your goal is to observe. Their goal is to get uncomfortable with you observing. Okay, we'll do this for maybe 7 minutes. So very quickly, just turn to, stand up if you want to, kind of bunch yourselves together.